Good afternoon, IMAA members, and welcome to a very, very special IMAA Insights and Innovation series today. We have the pleasure of our good partners and friends of the Indies, QMS. Adrian is going to introduce the one, the only Karen Nelson Films, Dr. Karen Nelson Films, who is not only Australia's but the world's leader in attention. Which, as we know from our IMAA surveys, is one of the most important, if not the most important things when it comes to, I guess, measurement with independence in this day and age. This is the first time that that many people, well, outside of South by Southwest, this is a world premiere for this information. So we're very, very lucky. Normally, we're the last to see things. Today, we are the first to see things. Not even QMS staff have seen this. So we're very, very lucky. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Adrian, who's going to kick things off, and I'll keep my mouth quiet.
Beautiful. Thanks, Sam. And thanks again to the team at the IMAA. Great to be here. Good afternoon, everybody. Just get on to the screen. My name is Adrian Venditti. For those that I haven't met, I'm the Strategic Sales Director here at QMS. And I would like to welcome everybody to today's webinar, The New Era of Attention-Driven Out-of-Home, which has been in development in conjunction with our great partners here at Amplified Intelligence. Today's presentation should run for about 45 minutes. Hopefully we'll have a little bit of time at the end for a couple of questions. But today we'll start by looking at the methodology used in understanding attention for out of home. We'll then share some of the findings from the study that will help guide planning in this new era of attention for out of home. And finally, the subsequent strategic considerations for brands. After an already 2-year journey, this marks the completion of the first phase of our ongoing initiative to deepen and expand the way out of home is perceived, evaluated, and executed. Because put quite simply, not all reach is created equal, and it is critical that we continue to look beyond legacy media metrics that are one-dimensional and focus too much on eyeballs alone. One question that can be answered easily is, what value does reach hold if an ad cannot be seen? As former Unilever CMO Keith Weed quite aptly put it, unviewable ads are like having your billboards underwater. In fact, unviewable ads make a mockery of ROI, a quote that I'm sure could be attributed to anybody on the call today. The opportunity to see an ad is an important first step in audience connection. However, most measurement options used in media today do not provide clarity on whether a human is actually watching. In other words, an opportunity to see is not seen. And I don't think anybody on this call would argue the fact that clients need to be investing in media where they understand their communication can be seen. So we've arrived at a critical point for out of home, a new era where multiple dimensions need to be considered and applied if we're committing to driving the best outcomes for our clients. And whilst it might be a new era, there's nothing new about attention, which has well and truly positioned itself at the forefront of modern media metrics, making it time to pay attention to attention. So that's really led us to the point where we are at today. And why should you pay attention to attention? Well, because without attention, there can be no impact. Attention really has proven to correlate strongly with mental availability, advertising effectiveness, and also driving brand growth, all obviously desirable outcomes for brands. So what did phase 1 of our study cover? Well, it spanned 3 cities, Melbourne, Brisbane, and the Gold Coast. It measured pedestrians across 2 different formats, our digital large format assets and street furniture, and it encompassed 9 locations with 12 advertising faces and clients spanning across 11 major categories. This culminated with a remarkable 1.23 million humans measured, making it the single largest sample collected globally by the team at Amplified Intelligence. I can see Karen nodding her head along there. Very good. Very excited. Additionally, different sites with different attributes were also strategically selected to represent a range of real-life situations. So bus shelter locations on the Gold Coast were identified by varying distances of time in view, dwell, orientation, and audience volume. And the same approach was used for digital large format in Melbourne and Brisbane to deliver an additional layer of validity, scale, and usability. And as I mentioned earlier, this is just phase one of our strategic roadmap with Karen and her team, with further studies looking to expand the number of locations, markets, formats, and modes of transport. So on to today's main event. Today you're going to hear from the leaders in human-centered attention, amplified intelligence, and their leader, Dr. Karen Nelsen-FIELD. For us, Karen and the Amplified Intelligence team were a really easy choice for this project. Firstly, the research they conduct is in the real world with real humans, and the advanced first-to-market technology that is used to determine accuracy is truly best in class. And finally, the uniformity of the model they employ across multiple channels allows for a true holistic view of the attention landscape for our clients and everybody on today's call. So with that in mind, without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce the wonderful Dr. Karen Nelsen-FIELD.
Thanks so much, Adrian. That is a really great overview of what we did. And it's interesting, we didn't script this, but the QMS team included a Keith Weed quote from Unilever. So he was a CMO of Unilever. And ironically, the reality is he is actually why I started this business. And the history is that I was an academic and my area was measurement. And what happened was Unilever contracted me for 12 months to understand the value of viewability, because the then Keith Weed CMO was a real loud voice in lack of being seen versus just being served. So the irony was I did this multi-country study and they asked me if I could quantify the value of a view, of viewability. And what happened was I came up with this novel idea that, hang on, what if I use computer vision? Because at the time it was reasonably new in social science. I worked out that if I could film people just like we do now with Teams interacting and also kind of connect the dots between the view that's happening behind the mobile, for example, I could probably work out how humans are actually interacting with different media types. Because at the time I was really annoyed with the idea of engagement because it was so broad and so fluffy. So I felt that bringing the word attention, because at the end of the day, that's what advertisers want, right? Advertisers want attention to their ads, not engagement, which could mean anything. So that's what we did. And sure enough, 3 countries, 12 months later, the writing was on the wall that viewability had a very poor relationship with actual attention. So I left. I literally stopped and left my tenured position and went into business. So it was quite an interesting quote that Adrian and the QMS team brought up, because I wasn't expecting it, but it's why I'm here. So with that said, I think the best place for us to start is to talk a little bit about how we collected such scaled data. So Adrian talked about the size of the sample, and I think it's important for you to understand, you know, it has been a 2-year relationship, and why it's taken us so long to kind of get to this point is because we actually had to build some models around it. And then what we'll do after that is kind of jump into the results. So it's always good to start with the definition. There is some conjecture in industry around what is the definition of attention. Let me tell you this, that at the end of the day, this is the textbook version of attention. What is being debated at the moment is the operationalization of it. Is it understanding views in terms of how people, like, is it human based or is it synthetic? So that's a completely separate debate. But the actual definition of human attention is this, and this is at its most basic. So it can be defined as concentrated awareness, which means basically stopping what you're doing to reduce whatever's happening around you in the environment and ignoring other things. So paying attention to one thing, reducing kind of distractions so that you can actually learn something. So it's about being able to, you want to understand what's going on in front of you so you can learn something from it. And the short answer is, I often say in advertising, that's easy to say, hard to achieve. So active attention, while it's really important, it is actually really difficult for advertisers to achieve, because with love, none of us really learn a lot from ads. So, but I just wanted to talk to you about the definition, because everything we've done for the QMS team revolves around attention being a layer of concentrated awareness. So we'll talk about that in a minute. So on the next slide, this is, if you haven't read anything of ours before, thinking about the definition, this is the 3 different layers of attention or types of attention that we consider. The one that's most famous is active, which we just talked about. So active attention is when you're looking straight at the ad, moving distraction away because you're looking straight at something with your eyes. And on mobile, we've done it on desktop, we've done it on TV and cinema as well. Passive attention is when you're not looking straight at the ad, but you're looking nearby the ad. So the ad might be at the bottom of the screen or to the side of the screen, or to above the screen, and you're looking at the feed, but the ad is present. So we call that passive, where you peripherally can see it, but you're not directly looking at it. And then non-attention is also equally important to calculate, because it's the proportion of the total makes up your investment in media. So non-attention is equally important. And in the case of mobile, it's when there's no way you could be looking at the screen in any kind of way. In the case of TV and cinema, it's when you're not even in the room. And desktop is, again, a bit the same as mobile, when you're not looking at, there's no way you could physically be looking at the ad in any way. So, as I said, we've collected data before on mobile, desktop, TV and cinema, but we've never, ever done it before on out of home. I know there are some competitors of ours or some colleagues of ours that have tried, but they do it in a very simulated way. So what, if someone's walking, if you're in front of a screen, whether it's TV or desktop, and you're kind of VR way walking through a street and you've got sort of things on the side, that's kind of what's been done from an outdoor perspective at the moment. But we chose the hard route, which is doing it properly. So how do we measure active and passive attention in outdoor? It's easy, right? The short answer is it's not, and that's why it's taken us quite a bit of time to build. And the reason why it's not that easy is because there's lots of factors that influence attention in the outdoor space. And if you think about the opposite of what we're generally collecting, it's distraction. So there's lots of things. So just to be clear, the unique cause of inattention is distraction, and the opposite of that is attention. So when you know what distractions are happening, you can kind of largely understand how much attention people will pay. So it's the inverse. So there are a lot of variables at play here. And then, quite frankly, on top of that, the sheer size, height of the large formats, in truth, we have collected, with intercepting cameras and things, where that the mobile is right close to their face, or the very worst, there might be sort of 8 feet or 10 feet away from the TV screen. But when you're talking about the scale of the assets here, and then so the height, the scale, but then on top of that, it's the thousands of people passing by. So Adrian talked about the size of the sample. That was 1 week, right, on average. So the complexity around measuring attention accurately is, essentially multiplied by the nature of those factors. So what we had to do was we needed, the next slide, some help with the QMS ops team to essentially fix cameras in real time at the top of billboards. So this is literally a world first. And the team helped us to install cameras at each site, as high up as 50 meters in real time, to basically be filming pedestrians and cars passing by. So and the footage comes back to us to be able to understand how much attention people are paid or not. And we'll talk about that in a sec. So again, first in the world, it's real time, it's footage from the top of the billboards, it's footage from the top of the street furniture, etc. So we were pretty excited. So the first part of this journey was that we had to build the models to translate the footage of you walking past into active, passive, and non-attention. And there are 3 things we did. The first thing is, so if anyone in the audience has any understanding of computer vision, again, all I'm doing is I'm collecting footage of your interaction as you pass by, right? The next thing we have to do is we had to check if first you're human. So we use this model around, or called pose landmarks, but basically it allows us to mathematically determine whether you're a human or whether you're something else, like a dog, or something. We've used pose estimation actually for things like TV, where we push out underaged footage. But basically what this does is it allows us to sort of say, okay, so how are there humans walking towards the asset, which is up to about 50 meters back. So again, so pose estimation is things like, how is your head and shoulders and knees proportional to what we would expect for a human versus non-human. So firstly, we ask, are you human? Then the model pushes this back into, are you looking at the ad? So as the human gets closer, the model then takes facial detection and gaze estimation into account. So facial detection is the landmarks on your face. It's not facial recognition. So I cannot tell if you're on the FBI list. That's the next level of privacy. This is purely, where is your nose and eyes, cheekbones, mouth edges, ears. And, we work out where physically your nose is pointing relative to the asset, and is there a realistic likelihood of you being able to see through this eye, for example. So it's quite complicated. I'm not a coder. And then we also use gaze estimation as people walk closer. So where are the eyeballs actually looking? So the model considers, all of these things as you're walking towards the asset. And then the third piece of the puzzle, which has been really important, is how many of you are there. So it's easy for us to kind of pick up a facial detection, but we then need to work out if your face landmark is different to the person that's standing next to you and different to the person standing next to them. And the reason why we did that is otherwise it was just this, if you think of when someone there's one of the assets where they all kind of come out of the train station and sort of sit right at the lights, and there's, dozens and dozens of people sitting or standing at the lights at any one point. We need to know how many people are there and where each of them are looking. And that's when we can actually deliver attention data for every single individual person, which is why this data is so robust and why we see the patterns that we do. So it's the combination of these methods, which is, we're pretty fussy. If you know anything about our business, we pride ourselves on rigor and science. So it's important for us to make sure that we have or had a reliable measure of attention for the out-of-home industry. If we just kind of rushed it and didn't kind of do what we would do for all of the other models that we've built, what would happen is we wouldn't have anything that's universal. So again, to be clear, the traceable attention field is quite a long way back. And we can collect active, passive, and non-attention. So again, for the next slide, it shows that when you are working with attention data, this is the same, right? So the worst thing that could happen in our industry now, as we've all kind of worked out the not all reaches equal scenario, which I published about 10 years ago, is that we work with metrics that still don't bring equalization back to our industry. So it was really important for us to build active attention for when a person is literally looking at the billboard or the asset, passive attention when someone is near there but not necessarily looking directly at it, but near enough that we can tell that their eyeballs could see it peripherally. So if there was a big red can on the billboard and it was a soft drink, you would know who it is. and non-attention, which is there's no way that person could even, it's behind them, or there is no way it could look at it. So personally, an agenda of mine, having a universal measure of attention is absolutely crucial for the success and the longevity of this ad ecosystem as it goes forward. Watch this space. I've just got some more things that I'm working on to make it even easier for brands to interact with this data and make it even more simple cross-platform. So that was really important. Okay, so let's get into the results piece, and also what it actually means for planning for attention out of home, because I think that's a really important part. So it's great, research is great, but it's the application that's really important to you all as agencies and working with brands that you do. So let's start with the overall numbers. What we found was that across all sites, we observed about an average of about 12 seconds of total attention. So that's the combination of active and passive, and the split between active and passive is 40-60. So 40% active, 60% passive. That is a strong contribution. The overall average is around 5.5 seconds, but you can see it's split here by street furniture, large format. And again, if you think quite naturally about distraction, the reason why street furniture gets more active attention is because you're literally, they were bus shelters, right? So people are in line, they're standing there in front of it with little distraction. I mean, sure, they're still switching, I guess, they're using their phone, but they're right in a point where they're right around it and the distractions. Whereas with the larger format, there's cars going past, so it's a little bit less. There's a few more distractions to consider. But overall, average active attention was 5.5 seconds. This is really good news for brands. So I don't know if a lot of you have seen some of the more recent stuff I've done, but this gives brands the ability to get their message across. So I'll talk about the attention memory threshold in a minute, but we need more time to get message across because, active attention, quite frankly, is becoming increasingly scarce, and we can see that in our own data. So the next slide actually talks about the attention memory threshold. This is one of those slides that follows me around. Excuse me. This is one of those slides. I'm just going to shut my door. Don't you love working from home and no one's due home? Sorry. So the attention memory threshold, this is one of those slides that follows me. So I presented this a couple of years ago and it literally went viral, and it still does to this day, and we still see the same patterns. So what we know is that around 85% of digital ads get less than 2.5 seconds of active attention. And what I found over the years is that the 2.5 second mark of active attention is roughly a line in the sand moment, which kind of links to long-term memory. So under 2.5 seconds is still valuable, but it's the 2.5 second plus that you start to see where memory retention starts to kick in. So I call this the attention memory threshold. So in other words, 15% of impressions across the digital ecosystem do not hit this threshold. And we see this continuously, no matter what data set we collect. And you can imagine we actually have, I think it's now something like 2.6 billion human data points. So it's not small data, and it's from multiple, I think 15 or 16 something countries. And again, it's one of those slides that go viral because that is pretty much telling of the reality of a human fast glance view. But when we looked at the data from the outdoor side of it, the proportion was literally flipped. So if it says 89, I'm going to probably round it down, sorry, QMS boys, because it's actually easy for us to kind of flip it in that way, but pretty much the same, but the inverse. So 89% of viewers get more than the attention memory threshold, which means they get more than the average 2.5 seconds of active attention. So And again, remember, this is with an average of around 5.5 seconds. So, this is quite significant for those who need time to tell a story, to be recognized, and to kind of put branded moments into memory retention, which is amazing. So that was a really amazing finding that we saw. Why is this happening? Why does outdoor get more attention than the typical digital site? It's interesting because it's a lot to do with something we found with the relationship between time in view and active attention. So let me explain a little bit more. On most digital formats, we find this is the two types of viewing distributions. I call one fast and one slow that we see in our data. On most digital formats, attention is fleeting, which means that it's not sustained in any way. Your attention to the ad decays super fast, and it's largely scroll based, so it's very fleeting. So even if, and then, so that doesn't necessarily mean the ad's moved off. It just means the viewing. So the ad might have moved to the top, or it hasn't been scrolled completely above it. So even if the ad is in view, it's not being viewed per se. It's literally being avoided. But what we know is that for out-of-home formats, this is actually quite the opposite of that. So we see a much slower decay. Now, sure, let's be real, there is some switching here because the grey area means the volume of inattention, but the inattention is a lot less than the average in a digital format, which is why the average attention seconds is higher. So this is different for out-of-home formats. What it basically means is that it's more sustained. So even if you're switching during the course of standing at the lights while you're trying to get across, you're pretty much sort of switching, but you're right in front of it and you're looking at it in a more sustained way versus get it out of my face and get me to the content. So that's what we call slower decay. And what this means for the QMS team and for out of home more broadly is that as time in view increases, so time in view being, so the longer people are there, so does the amount of active attention they pay, right? Again, if you're stuck at a pedestrian crossing in front of a big billboard, you're watching more actively than you're not. And the correlation between time in view and active attention is some of the strongest we've seen, which is 0.97. When I normally present the relationship between time in view and attention, at best, it's 0.22. So that's a 1 in 5 chance that a human is paying attention at any second of time. So it's a very, very different relationship. And that 0.22 is literally why not all reach is equal. So the digital ecosystem relies on time in view to measure human engagement / attention, but it literally fails because of the nature of the user experience of being able to scroll away or move it out of the way so that you can kind of read your feed or look at the content. So it's very different. So basically what this means is as time in view increases, so the longer you're standing around the asset, the greater the likelihood that active attention will increase also proportionally. So this is good news. Some other good news is that we found that each site has a solid mix of both passive and active. And passive attention, so I talk a lot about active attention and the importance of, memory retention and things like that. But passive attention is really good for different reasons. But the point being is that when the active passive ratio is known, it's predictable. So we can actually scale this data quite easily because of the time in view relationship and because it's got both passive and active attention. We can actually scale this relationship, this data across lots of different assets, which is fantastic from to be able to apply it from a media planning perspective. And the other reason why passive and active is a good thing is because normally you don't get, so normally it's the inverse. So if you get a lot of attention, active attention, typically passive attention is low. So if you think about something like a reel, you might get, let's just call it, 3 seconds or 2 seconds of time, but you wouldn't get a lot of passive because it's scrolled away really quickly. And the opposite is true as well. Like, so an ad on the bottom of a web format, you get probably 15 seconds of passive attention, but very little active. When it's a combination of both in near equal proportions, what this is good for is what I call the flywheel, the attention flywheel, which we did earlier this year. So basically what it means is active attention, because we've proven this before. So active attention is amazing for introducing new information. It's also really good for smaller brands who have lower awareness compared to the larger competitors, because they need more time to teach people what they sell, what their brand is and what they sell. Whereas passive attention is more valuable for reinforcement brands. So it's good for larger brands with highly distinctive assets that have established messaging. You basically know without even looking, like I said, the color blue that sells jewelry, who is that? You'll know that without needing to study it and needing to understand. So the flywheel of attention basically means it's good for all sized brands through the awareness, reinforcement, trial phase. So again, it's rare we see a stable ratio, if you like, of both. And then there's the reach piece, which, I don't think I can tell you any new news when I talk about the sheer scale. And we, even in the very short amount of time, saw that by default of the sample size. So this slide, and I'm sure the team will give you access to this deck, shows that in a very, very, very short amount of time, it's not just how much attention is delivered, but it's to how many people. So there was a piece from South by Southwest, which I commented on actually, around the reality of reach not working anymore, from a famous professor from overseas last week, and challenging the concept of Byron Sharp's, just reach more people and it will work. The reality is, in most cases, you don't get the reach you think you're getting because of the nature of the attention that sits underneath that. So that's a whole nother story. But the point being here is you get a bit of both. So you get high-reaching platforms, but you also get a really solid go of active and passive attention. And that's across, and Adrian and Christian classify them as heavy, medium, and light in their own format way. Interestingly, our attention, sorry to go, can you just go back? Interestingly, the nature of our collection also shows that with our total attention, so if you combine active and passive together, it's total attention. Our definitions of total attention and their definitions of heavy, medium, or light were aligned. So this was really good, because obviously, however they've measured distraction and given the asset a name of a format has been clever, because it does reflect the reality of attention. Okay. Okay, so this brings me to my famous chicken versus egg debate. And I have launched this before, but we have found some new stuff here. You might be thinking that, okay, the reason why outdoor does quite well is because the creative is typically bolder, is typically more clever, there's more risks taken. But the reality is it's not. Now, the chicken versus egg debate was sparked from a constant question I was asking, which is, which comes first, the creative or media? Because Nielsen put out a piece of work a few years back which talked to, if you build it creative, then, you know, attention will come, but it's the opposite of that. And what we know is that, and this is hard for creative people in the room to understand, but it is a statistical reality. So what we know is that creative does not define how much attention you can earn, the media type does. So just to step back, and this is a slide that I have presented before, but we're going to talk about the QMS data specifically in a minute. But what you can see on this slide is real data, and we see this over and over and over and over, no matter which country, what subset, what brands. But brand A, for example, on platform A gets 10.8 seconds, then on platform B, 6.1, 4.3, 3.7. And what you can see is that there is a natural decline of active attention across all different platforms from best to worst. Even brand M, for example, and brand L, you get the same decay. So now that's the same ad on platform A, the same ad on platform B, the same ad on platform C. So what you can see is there's actually the loss of attention seconds is always greater between best to worst platform than best to worst creative. So if you kind of step back a bit, platform A, no matter what creative you have, gets you roughly looking around about 8 seconds. Platform B, no matter what creative you have, because, you know, clearly brand A is better creative than brand M. Platform B is roughly around 5. Platform C, roughly 4-ish, probably 3.5-ish on platform D. So what you can naturally see is that the same creative is best or worst, depending on where you place it, is my point. If creative was the driver of attention, you would see the same amount of attention for brand A across all the different platforms, but you don't. You would see the same amount of attention for brand H across all the different platforms, but you don't. So what this tells us is it's the nature of the user experience and the nature of distractions from the user experience that defines how much attention your brand can achieve. And then your creative fits within that kind of range, if you like. I know that was a lot, but that's a very solid chicken and egg debate. So, and then when we look at this data, we see that here too, which doesn't surprise me because we see it all the time. So what this is showing you, now this is actual QMS data, is that there's the same ad. The brand A, again, on the strongest attention site is better than the medium attention site and then the lighter attention site. So again, the same pattern occurs, that the loss of attention seconds is greater from putting the same ad on best to worst than the actual creative within it. So again, creative media sets the stage, and that's how I usually like to say it, and creative, which is what this whole chicken and egg debate is about, basically is the one thing that drives to a sale, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And this is why we developed the hierarchy of attention. So and a lot of creatives struggle with this. So it's not on the bottom because it's not important. What this is what drives human attention to a platform. Most people think they're in control of their own attention and how they interact with formats, but it's actually not true at all. There's an amazing book, and I think Joanne Hari was there last week at South by, called Stolen Focus, and it talks to how technology literally defines how you interact with it, and we see that. So this is what we're seeing here as well, the way that the format and the platform and the device in which something's played on is what literally defines how much attention you can achieve. And it's the same here. So again, the fact that there are, you're kind of caught at a light, there's something right in front of your face, you can't scroll it, is why there's a higher amount of active attention than typical. So the next slide. So when I talk about creative being at the bottom of the hierarchy, it is in terms of its ability to drive attention, but it is literally the most critical factor in driving sales. So I've now come, when I do presentations, I now talk about attention amplification versus outcomes amplification, and they're very, very different things, and media planners and creative have to work together to understand how this works. So it is the most critical factor. So creative is the most critical factor in driving sales. So what we did find, actually this is one I've done earlier this year, and I'm going to then talk about the data that we've done here. So look what happens here. This slide shows us that even with the same level of active and passive attention, so you can see there are quality branding qualified as yes, mostly, and no. So even with active attention seconds being the same across 3 different groups of data, and passive attention being across the 3 different groups, the 3 different sets of data, what we can see is that there are double the outcomes essentially, depending on if you're well branded or not. So one of the critical things in creative in driving outcomes is quality branding, which is a combination of entry timing, size on the screen, frequency, consistency, things like that. I can't tell you how many brands we see that try to be clever with their branding on, for example, TikTok, because, they don't want to come across being old-fashioned. But even the big brands in the world are getting misattributed to their larger competitors because they're failing to have their branding appropriate to the nature of how humans actually their attention decays. So what this shows that, I could give you 30 seconds of active attention, but if your ad doesn't clearly connect you to, who you are, what you sell, there is no outcomes that can be achieved. And we see that again in this data. So the same pattern happens here. We split this sample into big, small, and challenger. And the reason why we did that is because naturally a big brand normally has better distinctive assets that are consistent. And that's why they're big, because people know who they are more, compared to challenger brands and small brands. And we found, again, near identically, that the same level of active and passive attention, the outcomes, again, were near double. So it's really important that small brands and challenger brands really, really think about, kind of pushing up the way that the branding appears, both in digital but also across any asset, because even 5.5 seconds, while it's great, sometimes if you're trying to be too clever and you are a smaller brand, people will misattribute it, particularly if the billboard is a color that they think of as one of your direct competitors. And the last thing we saw here was, I call them double jeopardies in my new book, which is launching this week. We see a number of double hits, if you like. So if you are a smaller brand, you probably would be aware of the double jeopardy kind of impact, in that people buy you less often. You have fewer people who buy you less often. That's the double hit. But we see that here, that there is an unfortunate double hit for smaller brands. So what we found is that even when big and small brands receive the same amount of attention on the same site, you would expect that there would be a gap between outcomes. So the one on the left, which is medium, versus the one on the right, that's what we're looking at. So the gap between how many outcomes big and small brands achieve on the higher attention media is 21%, which you would expect that. So in terms of brand uplift, smaller brands get 21% less brand uplift than bigger brands. That makes sense. But the same ads on the lower attention platform, the gap widens. So this is this double jeopardy. So a small brand with less active, the impact is hit harder. And that is exactly what we would call a double jeopardy effect. And that is not just outdoor, that is everywhere. So again, I know this is complicated, but again, this is why I call egg wins, not the chicken. So where you put your ad is extremely important in terms of being able for the chicken to fly, essentially. Well, I just thought of that. For it, for the chicken to, so it's basically the stage and the star. The star is the creative, the stage is the media, and that's how you have to think about it. So, where did we end up in terms of key takeaways? We worked out as a team that there are probably 5 things that you as a group should take from today. One is that out of home should definitely not be considered as a fast glance medium. And I think that's a really great way. I call it slow and fast decay, but I think the team calling it fast glance or non-fast glance is a really great way for individuals to think about it. If you think about your own experience with media, attention decay is a new era, but not as much so in outdoor. I mean, again, there's some switching, but the decay shape is much flatter. So this is really good news for time in view and for, solid memory forming active attention. We found that passive and active attention vary predictably by site type, and this is definitely something that can be factored in out-of-home planning. And I'm sure the team will work with you in terms of what your objectives are, because again, if you're a small brand and you need to grow, that's very different from a big brand that needs to just do reinforcement. If you're a big brand that has a new variant, that's different again, so you can work with the team in terms of the objectives. We also see, because of the passive-active split, that there is a cost-effective opportunity to leverage the flywheel completely on one format or one platform versus having to kind of get, frequency issues with, passive attention on a different format while you're getting active here. So it's a great way to build velocity, if you like, into this flywheel, which we talk about. So, get new users to learn and then get existing users to be reinforced by the same format, which is amazing. And small brands can get bigger results on higher attention sites with outdoors. So again, there is a double jeopardy effect. So if you are a smaller, a challenger brand, you do need to consider, the higher or heavy site that they build, because it does by default get you more reach and B, more attention, which both are important. So I think that's my side done. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Karen. So Sam, I'm not sure how we're tracking for time, whether you want to open the floor for a couple of questions or whether we take them on notice and come back to you.
Look, I think we've probably gone over time, but just if anyone has any questions whilst we have the great Karen here, I think we would like to take it up, but often there aren't any questions. Would anyone like to ask anything?
Hi, Karen. Yes, I had just a quick question. Sorry, I'm Angus. I'm from Hatched. Karen, you mentioned obviously there's creative, but then there's what goes into the creative as well. So you said that the longer dwell times, like the bus shelters that sort of have the 5-6 seconds of active attention, you would put something that's slightly more like brand storytelling kind of components in there, as opposed to the faster glance ones. Do you have sort of other information on other best practices for like what kind of content you would utilize per placement based on the average engagement time?
Yeah, so the new book's available, but you can always call me. Thank you. I can help you with that, and we've got a course that talks about this stuff too. But there are triggers around amplification of attention, and then I mean, there's no perfect, will you get this much, there's no actual perfect science because it depends on so many things, but there are things like unexpectedness and emotions. But yeah, the short answer is with this kind of active attention, you can teach them what you need to teach them. Now, if that means you just want to reinforce your brand, as long as it's front and center and it's distinctively you, then perfect. If you've got a message, as long as it's really obvious, don't make it too opaque. We often see unexpectedness works really well on outdoor as well. So things that you wouldn't expect to walk past and you see just gives you that slight amplification over average. Usually it's pretty hard to build emotion on a static. If it's a digital asset, it's probably easier, but on a static asset, it's harder. So that's where unexpectedness comes into it.
Okay, cool.
Angus, I can add to that too and say, if you want, we can take you through some other work we've done as well that can provide a bit more guidance around that at a format level, and it really supports everything that we've spoken about today as well. So we can pick that up separately.
Awesome, thank you.
Any other questions, guys? If not, we can connect you to the QMS team afterwards.
Absolutely.
Do so. All right, looks like it. Thank you so much, Karen Nelson Films. Wonderful, insightful, a lot of work there, and really leading the way in attention. So thank you very much. Our good partners and the ongoing support of QMS, thank you for all you do for the Indies, and thank you for sharing that today. And thank you for allowing us to be the first to see it in the industry. Members, thank you for tuning in. Just a reminder, there's a lot going on around the country at the moment. Perth, Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne. There's events on the next couple of weeks. So just reach out if you're not across all of those. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And Adrian, thank you so much for walking us through it. And talk to everyone soon.
Thanks for having us. Thanks, everyone.